So, everybody knows what serial killers are. I'm willing to bet that the first things that pop to your head are the usual blood and murder stuff. But I'm also willing to bet you also thought of psychopaths. Commonly in media, we see psychopaths as these crazed, murderous, unfeeling individuals who are possibly even egotistical and sadistic. Take Patrick Bateman from the movie American Psycho, for instance. He exhibits many of these listed characteristics. But what if I were to tell you that these portrayals are extremely inaccurate? For example, this
Never
is
thrilled,
M.E.
never
Thomas.
even really
Here's an interview I
sadness,
found with her
never
where she discusses how it's
remorse,
like to be a
although sometimes I
psychopath.
regretted
And while,
things. So
yes,
I
she
was
talks about
aware that
having
I
a
had kind of a dull, let's say, emotional palette.
she
Kind
never
of more
mentions
black and
how
white
she's
than
unfeeling, wants to
color.
stick a
I
knife
still don't
into
really feel
someone, or
fear.
is
I
in any way
definitely do take more
sadistic.
risks than
You may be asking yourself why I'm talking about this. Why mention psychopaths and killers and such? Well, today I'd like to talk about mental illness. More specifically, how mental illness has been misinterpreted and how it was treated in history. First off, I want to take a step back into the medieval ages, the times we commonly associate with knights in shining armor and such. Back then, mental illness was thought of to be a result of someone being possessed by demons, if you can believe it. And since religion was a huge deal, most mentally ill individuals were mistreated, to put it simply. One of the most common treatments were exorcisms. No, not like the movie The Exorcist, although these exorcisms were conducted by priests and other religious figures and did use prayer and ritual. One of the more extreme type of treatments were called trephining. This was another method of releasing evil spirits. And while I won't get into too much detail, I would just like to mention that this particular treatment had the patient undergo getting a small hole drilled into their skulls. Ouch. Mind you, we're still talking about mental illness. This is seriously how people misinterpreted mental illness, and seriously how it was treated. If we skip ahead to the 18th century, it doesn't get any better. These were the times we started throwing people into asylums, basically ostracizing them from society. These asylums, unlike modern asylums, were as horrific as the ones in media. Sadly, people were often kept in dungeons, chained to their beds, had little to no real attempt at treatment, and were even beaten. These places became widespread. Typically, people were afraid and even ashamed of these individuals. Asylums became a place where it was socially acceptable to lock away innocent people and make them go through hell just because they were suffering of mental illness. In the late 1800s, these places even became overcrowded. Moving forward into the 1900s, a man named Clifford Beers writes and publishes an autobiography detailing his experience within an asylum. The book was called A Mind That Found Itself. Most people describe his experience as degrading, dehumanizing, and inhumane. Also in the 1900s was an infamous war. World War One brought about a term you've likely heard before, that term being shell shocked. The origin of this term is actually an old misconception. Previously, soldiers and medics alike thought that the reason they were experiencing nightmares, feeling fatigued, or anxious, etc., was because the explosion of bullet shells in their ears caused a disturbance within the brain, hence the name shell shock. However, it wasn't until later when doctors realized that these people were actually experiencing what we know now as PTSD. Stepping back now, we can see a long timeline of the many times mental illness was misinterpreted and mistreated. It's honestly pretty scary. You might think we've gotten better at helping these individuals in the modern age, and technically you wouldn't be wrong. A person suffering from schizophrenia will no longer get accused of being possessed by demons. But people still have a negative view on mentally ill people, and there are still many misconceptions out there. I'm not going to tell you to go out and educate yourself in every single one, but I will say that all of us should have a more sympathetic view on mental illness. With that, I thank you for your time and hope you won't depend entirely on those horror movies you see around to educate yourself on mental illness. Seriously, don't.